Greetings, my loyal cultists. Gather round, for today's sermon is not about the mundane struggles of the living. No taxes, no laundry, no why won't this blasted Wi-Fi connect? No, today we delve into the realms of the dead. The truly magnificent and the utterly unhinged undead overlords. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever gazed upon a decaying army of skeletons and thought, I could do better? Or perhaps you've wondered why some undead kings seem to conquer continents while others can't even keep their haunted stronghold intact. Well, as a 652-year-old Lich Lord myself, I'm here to guide you through the do's and don'ts of ruling both the living and the dead. Think of me as your unlicensed undead life coach, except the life part is highly optional. Now, you might be asking, PoorDeadMan, why focus on overlords when you could teach us how to terrify peasants or brew a perfect poison? To which I say, aim higher, mortal. After all, if you're gonna be undead, why settle for skeleton crew manager when you can be CEO, corpse emperor overlord? First, we're gonna dissect the Witch King of Angmar. His kingdom was a vibe, but his planning? Less so. Then, we'll stroll through the skeletal slapstick of Evil Ash and his army of the dead. Next, a frostbite-inducing look at the White Walkers and their corporate approach to conquest. Finally, we'll close with Strahd von Zorovich, a vampire so tragic he makes Shakespeare's Hamlet look like a well-adjusted teenager. And don't worry, this won't just be a history lesson. It's also a survival guide, or an unsurvival guide, because if there's one thing I know about undeath, it's that failing spectacularly can be just as fun as succeeding. So ready your phylacteries, dust off your crypts, and let's dive into the shadowy depths of undeath. After all, immortality is just eternity's way of saying, hold my beer. The Witch King of Angmar, the original goth influencer of Middle-earth. Long before eyeliner and metal bands, there was this guy, Sauron's #1 henchman, rocking a spiky crown and a deathly aura that says, I'm not like the other kings, I'm worse. Let's start with his accomplishments. The Witch King didn't just rule Angmar, he turned it into a kingdom of nightmares. Nestled in the frozen north, Angmar had all the charm of a morgue on a winter's night, but that's exactly the vibe he wanted. Orc armies? Check. Trolls? Check. Creepy haunted castle that no one wants to visit even with a group on? Check. Double check. His piece de resistance, helping to obliterate the kingdom of Arnor, the northern home of the heirs of Elendil. Honestly, for a time, this guy was crushing it, both figuratively and literally. But let's be real, even in his prime, the Witch King had some serious red flags. His leadership strategy was basically terrorize first, ask questions never. And sure, that works if your goal is short-term domination, but for long-term sustainability, not so much. His alliances were as stable as a Jenga tower in an earthquake, and his habit of cursing entire regions, looking at you, Barrow Downs, made him even more enemies than allies. Now, the downfall? Spoiler alert, it was a disaster. After Arnor was toast, the Witch King thought, why stop here? And decided to antagonize Gondor. Bad idea. Gondor doesn't do subtle. They brought an army to his doorstep and absolutely wrecked his spooky empire. To add insult to injury, he didn't even get to go out in a blaze of glory. He fled. Yes, the bad Witch King took the undead equivalent of a sick day and ran off to Mordor to lick his wounds. Key lessons here? Well, first, don't put all your undead eggs in someone else's flaming basket. The Witch King's loyalty to Sauron was admirable, but when your boss is an evil eyeball with a questionable track record, maybe diversify your portfolio. Second, he underestimated Gondor. Never pick a fight with someone who has more soldiers than you have excuses. And lastly, his fatal flaw: overconfidence. He literally thought no man could kill him. Pro tip, when you're writing your invincibility clause, specify species. Because, as you know, it wasn't a man who took him down. It was Eowyn, an absolute legend who probably has Nazgul Slayer on her LinkedIn profile now. In conclusion, the Witch King was a cautionary tale wrapped in a cloak of dark power. Powerful? Yes, strategic, well, occasionally. But ultimately, his hubris led to his undoing. Let's call this management style aggressively overconfident with a side of poor planning. Okay, now let's talk about a general whose leadership skills made the Witch King look like a 5-star tactician. Evil Ash from Army of Darkness. If you haven't met him, imagine your evil doppelganger came to life and immediately started failing upwards. That's Evil Ash. Vain, power hungry, and with all the strategic genius of a damp sponge. First off, the aesthetics. You've got to give credit where credit is due. I mean, the Army of the Dead looks incredible. We're talking full-on medieval skeleton warriors, complete with rusted armor, decaying siege engines, and the unique combination of horror and slapstick comedy that only Sam Raimi could pull off. But beyond the spooky visuals, this army has a glaring flaw. They are hilariously incompetent. Skeleton warriors tripping over themselves? Yeah. Catapults that break mid-siege? I mean, it's like the Undead version of Amateur Hour at the comedy club. And I've been there. The mastermind behind it all. Well, that's Evil Ash. Picture this. A cackling, rotting corpse in charge of an undead army, fueled by the power of the Necronomicon Ex Mortis. Sounds terrifying, right? Yeah, well, it would be if it wasn't so profoundly bad at his job. I mean, Evil Ash is a walking lesson in what happens when leadership is all ego and no execution. He spends more time preening, posing, and giving melodramatic speeches than he actually spends leading his troops. Take the climactic battle at Lord Arthur's castle. Evil Ash rolls up with his skeletal horde, right? He's ready to claim the Necronomicon and conquer the land. At first glance, it's a formidable sight. But within minutes, the cracks begin to show. His soldiers are more interested in bickering than fighting. His siege tactics are laughable, and his overconfidence leads him straight into a dynamite-fueled humiliation, courtesy of Ash. Here's the takeaway. Charisma can only get you so far. Evil Ash may have had the flair of a true undead overlord, but he lacked the follow-through. Instead of strategizing, he relied on sheer numbers and spooky vibes, which it turns out are no match for a chainsaw and a guy with an attitude problem. I mean, let's talk about that fatal flaw, hubris. Evil Ash is so convinced of his own brilliance that he underestimates his enemies at every turn. Classic mistake. His obsession with theatrics over tactics is his undoing. And while it makes for great entertainment, it's not exactly a winning strategy. But let's be fair. Evil Ash does teach us one important lesson about undead leadership. If you're gonna fail, fail big. I mean, make it memorable. Because even though his campaign was an unmitigated disaster, I mean, you can't say it wasn't entertaining. From over-the-top speeches to his skeleton slapstick antics, Evil Ash and his Army of the Dead remain iconic. Not because they succeeded, but because they failed so gloriously. In conclusion, Evil Ash's leadership style can be summed up as all sizzle, but no strategy. He's the undead overlord equivalent of a reality TV star. He's loud, he's flashy, and he's doomed to implode under the weight of his own ego. But hey, at least he looked cool while doing it. Ah, the White Walkers, the original Frosty Boys of Game of Thrones. I mean, these guys managed to not only freeze Westeros, but also HBO's budget with cinematic marches and dragon battles. If the Witch King was Middle-earth's goth icon, then the White Walkers are what happens when you combine Norse mythology with an ice cube factory and sprinkle in a healthy dose of existential dread. Let's start with the tactics. The White Walkers are led by the Night King. He's a silent, brooding figure who's basically the undead equivalent of that guy in The Office who communicates only via email subject lines. He commands his undead hordes, called Whites, with a single icy stare. And let's be honest, it's effective. When you can raise an army from the very corpses of your enemies, you really don't need inspirational speeches or team-building exercises. Now, you'd think an army made entirely of the reanimated dead would be unstoppable. And for a while, it was. The White Walkers spent centuries lurking beyond the wall, amassing forces and waiting for their moment to shine, or rather freeze. And when they finally made their move, chilling. They turned a dragon into an ice-breathing weapon, shattered the wall, and marched south with all the unstoppable inevitability of your least favorite winter storm. But here's where things go sideways. For all of their terrifying power, the White Walkers made some rookie mistakes. First First off, the Night King put all his frosty eggs into one very fragile undead basket. I mean, himself. Sure, it's great to be the top dog, but don't drag your entire army to collapse like a Jenga tower if you die. That's not just bad leadership, that's an HR disaster waiting to happen. Second, the Night King's strategy lacked finesse. I mean, his plan was essentially walk south and kill everything. It's straightforward, but it's not exactly nuanced. No diplomacy, no alliances, no contingency plans. It's like he was trying to win chess by flipping the board. Effective? Sometimes. Sustainable? Absolutely not. Let's talk about his dramatic tendencies. Yes, reanimating a dragon is cool AF. But did he have to use it to break the wall in the most theatrical way possible? Couldn't he have just flown over it? The guy's got a flair for the dramatic that rivals Evil Ash, and it cost him dearly. Because when you make a big show of all your power, you also paint a giant target on your big icy back. Then there's his ultimate downfall. The Night King underestimated his enemies, particularly a plucky assassin named Arya Stark. He had centuries to prepare for his moment of glory, and he gets taken out by a teenager with a Valyrian steel dagger? That's not just embarrassing, it's meme-worthy. So what can we learn from the White Walkers? First off, you gotta diversify your leadership structure. Putting all your power into one individual is a recipe for disaster. Second, have a plan that extends beyond kill everything. Finally, remember that overconfidence is the death of many in Overlord. Literally, in this case. In the end, the White Walker's legacy is one of ice, death, and questionable leadership choices. They were a terrifying force of nature undone by their own hubris and their lack of adaptability. Let's call their management style the Icy Tyrant. All power, no flexibility. Now we have come to Strahd von Zarovich, the ruler of Barovia and the undisputed king of gothic melodrama. Okay, the Witch King was all about brute force, the White Walkers were existential dread on ice. Strahd is what happens when your undead overlord subscribes to the moody vampire aesthetic and takes it a little bit too seriously. I mean, way too seriously. Let's start with his backstory because, oh boy, is this a doozy. Strahd was once a mighty warrior who conquered Barovia for his family. I mean, it sounds impressive, right? But then he got hit with a midlife crisis so hard he made a pact with an ancient dark power to become immortal. I don't know anybody that's done that, do you? The price? His soul, his humanity, and apparently his emotional stability. Oh, and he did it all because he was jealous of his younger brother, Sergei, who had the audacity to be loved by Tatiana, the woman that Strahd wanted but could never have. Instead of moving on like a well-adjusted adult, he murdered his brother, scared off Tatiana, and turned an entire realm into a haunted hellscape. Talk about overkill. Barovia itself is like Strahd's personal diary come to life. The land is eternally gloomy, cloaked in mist, and populated by terrified peasants who are basically stuck in an undead HOA nightmare. Castle Ravenloft, his headquarters, is a towering symbol of his ego and misery, filled with traps, undead minions, and the occasional cryptic journal entry. Strahd may be a vampire, but let's face it, he's also the most dramatic landlord you will ever meet. But here's the thing about Strahd. He's not just a villain. He's a tragic villain. Beneath all the brooding and blood-sucking, he's a deeply lonely figure, cursed to repeat his failures over and over. Every time Tatiana is reincarnated, he tries to win her over, and every time it ends in heartbreak. It's like a supernatural soap opera with no happy ending in sight. Now let's analyze his leadership style. Strahd runs Barovia like a toxic ex runs their Instagram account. Obsessively, pettily, and way too much focus on appearance. He rules through fear, manipulates his subjects, and turns anyone who crosses him into undead servants. But for all of his power, he is trapped. Both physically in the mists of Barovia and emotionally in the endless quest for validation. Key lessons from Strahd? First, maybe don't let your personal baggage define your entire kingdom. The guy turned his heartbreak into a curse that affects everybody. I mean, Barovia could have been a thriving goth paradise, but instead it's just a sad, cursed realm where no one even enjoys the local wine anymore. Second, Strahd's inability to let go of his past is his greatest weakness. He's so fixated on reclaiming Tatiana that he can't even focus on anything else. Pro tip, if you're gonna live forever, you might want to pick up a hobby, or at least some better coping mechanisms. Finally, Strahd is a classic case of too much power, not enough accountability. I mean, sure, he can control the weather, summon wolves, and turn into a bat, but all that power means nothing when your biggest enemy is your own tragic ego. In conclusion, Strahd von Zarovich is the undead overlord who reminds us that even immortality can't fix bad decision making. He's the ultimate example of how not to handle rejection, workplace relationships, or long-term goals. Let's call his management style eternal melancholy with a side of micromanagement. So there you have it, my loyal cultists. A grand tour of undead overlordship from Angmar to Barovia. We've seen the highs, the lows, and the truly questionable management decisions of some of history's greatest necromantic narcissists. But what have we learned? Well, first, if you want to rule the dead, you're gonna need more than just dark magic and a catchy title. Take the Witch King of Angmar. He had his aesthetics, sure, but overconfidence and poor delegation were his undoing. Lesson learned, even the most terrifying undead overlords can be brought low by a determined human, or hobbit, or elf, or... you get it. Then there's Evil Ash, the skeleton-raising superstar of slapstick failure. He taught us that charisma alone isn't enough. You need strategy, not just sizzle, or else your army of the dead might end up as a punchline. The White Walkers reminded us of the importance of adaptability. I mean, sure, an army of whites and an ice dragon are impressive, but if your entire empire collapses when one guy gets stabbed, maybe rethink your contingency plans. Also, maybe don't antagonize small, sneaky assassins with Valyrian steel daggers. Finally, Strahd von Zarovich, the brooding vampire king of Barovia. He showed us that even immortality can't fix bad coping mechanisms. Therapy! His entire domain is a monument to heartbreak and questionable life choices. Lesson learned. Don't let your personal drama become a professional disaster. So, aspiring undead overlords, the takeaway is this. Power is nothing without planning. Ego is your greatest enemy. And if you want to rule forever, you'd better learn to laugh at yourself. Because the living, and sometimes the dead, certainly will. Before you shuffle off to haunt the comment section, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon. Join the cult of the dead. It's free, eternal, and it comes with a complimentary curse of immortality. And if you enjoyed this, let me know which undead overlords I should cover next. After all, the crypt is always open for new material. Until next time, meatbags, remember, you can't kill a dead man, but you can definitely critique his leadership skills. Stay spooky, huh?